add AI to HCI, so human computer and AI interaction design, you're adding a whole new design system. And I don't think that we have figured out what that design system is. So put it one way, if we could, our future 10 years from now selves come back and just download what we learned, no new tech, just here's what we learned about how to do design in the future with HC and AI, then we could do a bunch of stuff now, right? There was nothing prohibiting certain innovations from occurring faster on the web, except nobody had thought of them yet.
Hey, you found Ways We Learn, an investigation of how learning happens across all ages and modalities. Let's go learn something. Hi, I'm Sean. Welcome back to Ways We Learn. So I've spent years in the field of EdTech as a tech integrator, as a master's student in EdTech implementation and curriculum and strategy, and then as a director of academic technology. And along the way, I became kind of disappointed with a lot of what I saw in EdTech. There was way too much of what I saw as the shiny new object syndrome happening and way too little of actual learning transformation that it promised. And this has been happening way before what we currently think of as EdTech. So if you think way back, the clay tablet was perhaps the original EdTech creation. One-to-one tablets for everyone, said the ancient Mesopotamians. And since then, we've had blackboards and whiteboards and radio and film strips and TV and calculators and computers and many other EdTech things, innovations that I've skipped over. And EdTech innovations typically promise transformative learning, but they don't always deliver. So if you're familiar with the current state of EdTech in schools, you've probably seen projectors and interactive whiteboards, and those are some of the more recent innovations. But many teachers use them the same way that teachers used overhead projectors when I was a kid, which is to say they show things on them at the front of the room. And so the affordances of the technology don't always add up to learning transformation. And that is what got me a bit disenfranchised with EdTech. So here we are in the world of AI. And then the question is, why is AI different? So today, I'm going to be speaking with Steve Midgley and Whitney Whealdon from Learning Tapestry. Steve is the founder and managing director of Learning Tapestry. Whitney's the director of Learning Innovation. Previously, Steve served as the deputy director of educational technology for Arne Duncan at the U.S. Department of Education. He's also served as the director of education at the FCC. Whitney has worked in education for over 20 years, including 10 years at the Louisiana Department of Education, and led the creation of the ELA Guidebooks, which is an English language arts curriculum used in over 80% of Louisiana districts and other states nationwide. So both of these folks really know education. And so they're working with this company called Learning Tapestry, which is an EdTech and innovation consultancy that promises to help you solve hard problems in complex technology-based educational ecosystems. And so I can't think of a more complex educational ecosystem than the one we're in now with AI. So my big question today is whether the affordances of AI will lead to truly transformative learning. So, Whitney and Steve, welcome to Ways We Learn. Thank you for joining.
Hey, Sean. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, too. Nice to be here.
Absolutely. So let's hear first just about your backgrounds. Tell us a little bit more, because I shared a little bit, but there's a lot more to what you've both done.
So I've been working in education since around 2001, when I left work in the more traditional startup technology sector. And I started trying to put technology into schools in ways that were directed by the administrations, the systems, the social policy sort of pressures. And I've grown sort of disillusioned with that approach over the years that I've been involved in education, and started to see that that the interests of the bureaucracies and the interests of educators and the interests of students are not as well aligned as they should be. And I think Learning Tapestry is a reflection of trying to build a business that can build solutions that are reflective of the interests of educators as opposed to the interests of institutional bureaucrats or administrators.
And I was a classroom teacher. And then, as you said, Sean, I worked at the Department of Education in Louisiana and worked with Steve and others at Learning Tapestry, and was really compelled by their mission that's similar to what you said, Sean, about feeling disenfranchised by EdTech. there was this sense that as a teacher and even at the Department of Education, many EdTech providers would come in and say, we have this brand new product for you and it's going to make all the difference. And inevitably, someone would buy it and then it would fail miserably because it didn't actually answer any of the problems that the people using it, the teachers and the students, had. And so when Learning Tapestry came along, the whole idea was, what problems are you trying to solve? And can technology solve those, or should technology solve those? And that felt very fresh and new as a perspective for EdTech. And so I left the Department of Education and joined Learning Tapestry to try to fulfill that mission as well. And so definitely feel the disenfranchisement or disillusionment, as you mentioned, Sean. And we feel like at Learning Tapestry, we're really trying to right that wrong as best we can. So.
Yeah, that's great. And just give us a little bit of background on just the kind of work that Learning Tapestry does too, and not just the purpose. What is it that Learning Tapestry is working on?
So what we do is provide consultative services and engineering services to solve problems rather than move product. And that can involve moving product, right, when we're doing that kind of work, but it's specifically targeted, which is what Whitney sort of identified a minute ago, towards identifying the problem that an institution or a company or another organization might have, and then taking the steps forward to solve that problem. So just to give you a really concrete example, we're working with an organization who is interested in course information in community colleges. And it's a big problem of understanding the vast number of courses that are available and what students are taking and how that connects to the job workforce and to training opportunities and other components of the workforce industry. And we're working with them to use AI to try to map the courses to more structured metadata that then could be used in broader systems. And if we could do that, we could potentially enable new services for students, target better instructional outcomes in different environments, right? There's a lot of things they can do with that data. So this is what I might call deep infrastructure, meaning no one will ever hear about Learning Tapestry. No one ever, aside from this podcast, no one ever know our name, that we did anything with regard to this. But all of a sudden, potentially, and no one will even necessarily know that AI was involved in that problem, but potentially then new services would be emerging from this nonprofit that has this sort of social impact objective that they can now enable a whole new sort of set of capabilities in what they do for a living to make the world better. So it's that putting our shoulder to other people's wheel and solving technical problems in the background like that. That's a way to describe how we work at this company. Does that help?
Nice. Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head that there's so much of ed tech here's this new thing, therefore it should be in your classroom. And Whitney, you said you've felt that pain. I've felt that pain. I mean, I was leading an academic technology department at a school and constantly being pitched on these new devices, new technologies, new approaches. And my question was always, how's this going to change the learning experience? And often the answer is, it's not. It's just a different tool. And using the kind of thing you're describing, taking the data and actually using it to inform whether it's what offerings they have or what they do next with the students who have taken these offerings, or whatever that use of the data is, that's actually a thing that makes a difference, as opposed to just buy a new LMS. Because
right. But an LMS can be part of that solution. Right.
And I think that's something else I would add, Steve, that we I think the whole idea of like Learning Tapestry is stitching pieces together to create something new. And so as a user of Learning Tapestry or client of Learning Tapestry, that was something that came across too, the idea that, and we work with a lot of open educational resource curriculum publishers and that type of thing, or other people in the education space who are trying to figure out if technology works for them. And they might have 3 disparate technology products that if those 3 things could work together, it would solve a lot of their problems. And so sometimes we end up doing some consulting work to understand how are those products working for them or not working for them. And then if we could if we could take these two products and build a little bit of technology in between the two to stitch them together, sometimes using AI, sometimes using other types of technologies, then we could solve a big problem for them. And so often it looks like seeing and analyzing all the pieces of technology they're using and trying to understand how to create a more coherent system, and maybe some engineering work to stitch those pieces together. So that's kind of the idea of the tapestry piece of the learning.
Sure.
So.
No, it makes sense. Yeah. So, all right, EdTech has been around for a while, like I said, a long line of educational technologies that have had a lot of promise in the classroom, many of which have not delivered. Why is AI different?
Conceptually, I think the analogy that you've shared, Steve, about the bridge building is helpful for framing what the promise is of AI. And that's
Right.
yours, so you
Yeah.
should share
Fair
it.
enough. If we think back to the Roman era, they were building bridges with stone and mortar and concrete. And if you go to the 16th century in Europe, they were still building bridges that same way. And then all of a sudden, iron foundries were introduced during the Industrial Revolution, and capabilities emerged from this new material that enabled bridge design to evolve. And so at the beginning, my understanding, they were just using it as structural support. So they'd build their stone and mortar bridge, and then they would put little L-arms and other things bolted onto the bridge to just make them a little more reliable, a little sturdier, handle a little bit more weight. But the bridge building design systems were largely the same and just getting a little bit improved. And then people started dealing with girders and welding and hot bolts and all of this kind of tech, which I'm not an expert in. But they started building different bridges, and they started spanning much further, and they started carrying much greater weights. And all of a sudden now you could go across a river with, a giant freight train. And that was not conceivable in the old paradigm. I believe that kind of thinking about AI is useful to say right now we're adapting existing processes and welding AI in amongst them. But the world doesn't change, but potentially what we can do in the world does by leveraging AI technology the way that sort of iron girders and other sorts of structural elements enabled new kinds of bridge building. But you still have to go from one side of the river to the other. That's still a problem that you have. So AI doesn't change the problems that we have as humans or anything like that. So I don't know how helpful that line of thinking
No,
is.
I think that is. I think that's very helpful because it gets at the idea of, I mentioned this in my intro, the idea of affordances of technology. What do the technologies allow you to do? And that's exactly what you're talking about, that the building a bridge with stone and mortar doesn't allow you to do the same things that building a bridge with steel allows you to do. So if we think about it that way, then what are those affordances with AI in education in particular that didn't exist, 5 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, I think starting with that idea, like applying the analogy at a higher level, I've also heard a similar comparison of AI for the humanities being similar to a calculator. And interestingly enough, we also had a conversation with someone who was like, I don't like that comparison because a calculator is still, in a sense, kind of a computer. And so it still has a very directed outcome. And we'll get into how AI is a little different than that. But I think conceptually, how this applies is that when the calculator came along, math educators had to redefine what it means to know and do math. And so you could no longer use math computations or like fluency with math facts, et cetera, as a proxy for deep and conceptual math understanding. And I think similarly in the humanities, AI opens up some affordances to really be a catalyst to help us in the humanities, particularly English language arts, rethink what it means to make connections and have a deep conceptual understanding of language and text and writing. And I think for a very long time in English language arts, particularly secondary, we've allowed the writing of an essay to be a proxy for, oh, the kid gets this. They understand this. They are able to write an essay, therefore they get how to deeply understand this text. And I think that that writing of the essay is simply a proxy and not actually, it can be a true show of deep understanding, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. And AI is kind of exposing that difference and this idea that being able to write something well and eloquently doesn't mean that the ideas that sit under that are like deep, thoughtful, original ideas. And so it is kind of a reckoning for English language arts and potentially socialized teachers or humanities teachers to really rethink, what does it mean to deeply understand this text or engage in a conversation with someone and have refinement of ideas over time and iterate on that. And so that, I think that's one potential really big affordance that AI is allowing us, is to rethink. Like, another example is, often in English language arts classrooms, we use different pedagogical structures like discussion to serve as a, like, I'm going to check what my kids understood in the last 30 minutes when they were working on their own. And we're going to have a discussion where we talk about it. But really, you're just checking for understanding. And now if you have AI serve in the role of supporting kids along the way, what is the role of that discussion now? Or what is the role of the essay that you like? We have to just rethink some of the structures that we've counted on to exist and be there. I think it goes back a little bit to the bridge analogy of, we're still trying to show that learning, but now it's like, how do we do that? And how do we do that differently? And I think there's lots of other examples, Steve. I don't know if you have any affordances off the top of your head.
I think you're making the crucial point, which is the way in which we understand expertise, proficiency, and other issues like that are going to be different as a result of AI. So, for example, inside this company, we used to, when we were hiring software engineers, give them a paid and timed test task. So that we'd say, take away, and you can work up to 8 hours on this problem, and we will pay you for the time that you spend before you're hired here. And depending on the results of your performance, the actual code that you write on that problem, we may or may not hire you, but you'll get paid either way. And so that was sort of a value system to say, we value your time even when you're not working here and that kind of stuff. But now if I just take the test task that we had and paste it into Claude or GPT, it just passes. So that means that on any given 8-hour day, an engineer and an AI are roughly parallel. They can solve the same chunk of problem. But over 30 days, that's not true, right? So the level of complexity of human behavior and human achievement is, at today's rate, still different than an AI, but at any given moment, it's really hard to tell the difference. And that means that the way that we teach is going to have to be different, right? The way that we assess and understand what proficiency a student has achieved is going to be different. So I think that's the point Whitney's getting at, and it's the table stakes for AI, in my opinion. But I think that for affordances more broadly, there are, I think Matt Iglesias talks about social policy from this, he's a fan of what he calls slow and boring. I think he has a newsletter or something along those lines. And I think that affordances that are slow and boring are the important ones, like I was describing, like using AI to go out to college websites, understand the courses they're offering, map it over to some other target database, and enable somebody to achieve something with all of those courses now well understood. That's super boring. Like, that's just, there's no flash in that at all, but it's solving a really profound problem. And it's a problem that can't effectively be solved without AI, meaning the cost would be immense, and courses change every year. So it's not just like we do this once and, oh my God, think we're done. It's, we have to do it again next year or every semester. And so just the idea of trying to build up an infrastructure to scrape that would be sort of Google sized. They could do it, but there's no benefit in putting that much effort into scraping and understanding college websites. But AI can do it. So it's not about, oh, well, we can just make humans irrelevant and reduce the cost. It's like, no, you can achieve problems with human effort that you couldn't achieve before, that were just, you would throw away the problem entirely as unsolvable in the past. And now it's like, oh, wait, no, that is now a solvable problem. We wouldn't have ever attempted it in the past.
So, yeah. So, Whitney, what I heard you describe feels like disruptions to the status quo that come from AI. And I disagree with the person who disagrees with the calculator analogy, because I think that it actually is, I actually wrote about this in LinkedIn, that the calculator analogy, I think, is completely apt for the moment that we're in, but actually with a step beyond, which is that a calculator can't think for you, but an AI can, and this is air quotes if you're not watching the video, but an AI can, quote, think for you. It's
Mhm.
not really thinking if you know
Well,
how this stuff works, but it actually is capable of producing what a human would be capable of producing. But that, as I see it, is not an affordance of the AI in education so much as a disruption of how, as you said, how we analyze someone's output and evaluate someone's output and determine whether they're learning. And then, Steve, the example that you gave is definitely a way to improve education, but not in the classroom focus, not in a classroom setting, but in sort of the background to what might go into the decisions made in the classroom. Are you seeing, I guess, I wasn't expecting to go this way, but are you seeing specific uses of AI that either a teacher or a school or, decision makers or whoever would say, this is a great way to bring AI into the classroom? Because, Whitney, with your example, teachers don't want to see AI going and writing
yeah.
papers for people. How is it actually being used as an ed tech tool, or is it more that it's shifting how we need to think about education in the face of AI?
I think it's both, actually. So I see right now the big products I'm seeing out there that teachers tend to be using. There's two main categories. There's the AI as tutor category,
Hmm.
which the AI is effectively providing or supporting the student in some particular way. And then there's also the AI as a productivity tool for the teacher, where it's
Hmm.
helping the teacher develop a lesson plan or create a slide presentation or
Right.
keep track of information or whatever it might be. And I think both of those uses are probably going to persist as AI improves and we learn better. And I think that that is just the very beginning and start of where AI is going to be involved in education. And I think some of the things that we've seen is, in particular, as we've been working in the AI, is this idea of AI kind of as a human, or I guess like a factory, where it's like there will be AI components where the AI is engaged in a task, and then it might pass off something to a human to engage in a task. And then the human might do something and pass that off to another AI to engage in a task. And so
Hmm.
this idea that it's not necessarily just a student going to AI and getting all the problems solved by the AI directly, but there's a combination and interaction among the like across the process.
Sort of an intelligent tool. Yeah.
Yes, more so.
Yeah.
And so I think that um again, I think the idea is that we will have tutors, AI tutors, and we will have AI productivity tools. But I think that some of the affordances that we're going to start seeing are some of the ways that AI can do things differently at a greater scale or faster or more efficiently than a human could do it alone. And a computer couldn't do it because a computer doesn't have the ability to discern and make some inferences that AI does. And I don't know, Steve, if you like some of the
Hmm.
other vector embedding and kind of stuff. I don't know if you want to
Oh,
get
yeah,
into some of that or
yeah.
not.
I mean, I don't know how technical we want to get, but
Bring
we
it.
can. Yeah. on the on this point that Whitney's making, human computer interface design, often re-spoken in the industry as product and UX, user experience design, um,
Hmm.
is importing 60 years of computer science and and use of that computer science, computer technology into industries, into personal lives, and the introduction of Lotus 123 and the personal computer, and everyone said, oh well, there'll be no more accountants because everyone can just account for themselves, and it turns out there's more accountants per capita now than there were then. Um, so I'm I'm not trying to say that AI won't cause job loss and AI won't cause social disruption. I think that those things are likely, but I'm no expert. But I also think that trying to predict in what ways humans are going to adapt and interact with these new capabilities is really hard to say. And so we should all be
Hmm.
skeptical and reluctant to jump to conclusions, but we should also be skeptical and reluctant to believe people whose incentives are aligned to promoting these kind of things. The capabilities themselves, to just get to Whitney's point, often sit out of sight. And so when you say human-computer interaction was disrupted in the 90s by web tech, right? So we were all building these client-server apps and this whole mentality of how apps should look and how we should interact. And now those apps are largely gone, or even when they're there, they're largely just reformed versions of the web presence that they had. When you add AI to HCI, so human computer and AI interaction design, you're adding a whole new design system. And I don't think that we have figured out what that design system is. So put it one way, if we could, our future 10 years from now selves, come back and just download what we learned, no new tech, just here's what we learned about how to do design in the future with HC and AI, then we could do a bunch of stuff now, right? There was nothing prohibiting certain innovations from occurring faster on the web, except nobody had thought of them yet, right? And I think that we are in that moment of very rapid innovation, very rapid increase in technical capability. And so there's just a lot that's uncertain and unknown. So there's a lot of promise and we can all speculate, but I just want to be cautious about both over-promising or sort of saying, oh, well, that's all just for the future and it's not going to happen.
Sure. Yeah. We just have no idea where it's going. And that's actually something that has been, that idea has been touched on. I like how you said it, the HCAI. Others that I've spoken with have said that I'm thinking of Claire Zhao from GSV, who was talking about the fact that chat is not the ideal interface for human-computer interaction. And I love that idea of if we could sort of look 10 years forward and go, well, where did we get to? What's the ideal, not that we're there in 10 years necessarily, but what's a better way of interacting with the machine? It's definitely not going to be typing. And so what is that?
And I think one of the, tying it back to the classroom, I think teachers are rightfully scared that kids are going to use the AI to cheat. And so in many cases, that fear model is resulting in them trying to say, you cannot use it, you cannot use GPT and you cannot use these AI because they are, you have to think. And all it does is basically push kids toward it further. And so it is about trying to help students understand how to use the AI and how to figure out these interactions and see it as a tool rather than a replacement for the learning, because whether they like it or not, they probably already using it. And so I actually just attended a conference, speaking of GSB, the AI Revolution show, and many of the presentations were teachers talking about how they're helping to usher in AI into the classroom and beyond this idea of cheating. And there's products out there to try to detect whether AI is being used, and there's been not lots, but there's been research coming out about how they actually present some unfair biases against non-English speakers and against other people who are not as capable at writing. And so it's not necessarily helpful to try to figure out how to stop it, but rather figure out how to incorporate it into the classroom. And again, I think that I don't think the tutor is going away, and I don't think the productivity tools are going away. But another potential risk here is that we end up disintermediating the teacher. And I think that both Steve and I are very against that idea and feel like AI can actually support and enhance what the teacher is doing rather than replace what the teacher is doing. And some of the tools I'm seeing come out, and particularly in the chat interface, run the risk of basically just replacing what the teacher might do. And so I think we're in a space right now where we really have to figure out what is the role of AI, what is the role of the teacher, and what can AI do really well and support and enhance, and then what does the teacher have to do really well and that the AI just could not do. And I think that's where I was saying earlier about rethinking some of our structures and the way we set things up. we've never had this, I guess, assistant before. And so teachers have had to think about and put limitations on what they can do in a classroom because they haven't had the ability to on demand create a text for a kid that could build some knowledge that they might need in that moment. And now they have that ability. And so that affordance of being able to do some things on demand that they couldn't do before and they had to kind of pre-engineer, AI provides that. But now we have to think about what does that mean about how I've structured things in the past and what I can do in the moment versus what I have to prep for or follow up on in the future. So.
Yeah, and I think another, I'm just thinking about this as you talk about it, another way to look at this is sort of through the lens of like Clay Christensen's disruptive innovation. And the fact is that if an AI can do exactly what a teacher can do, it's going to be cheaper and more efficient potentially for the AI to do it. But that doesn't mean we should replace the teacher with a computer. What then can the teacher do that wasn't possible for them to do because they were stuck doing all this stuff before that the AI can now replace? And that's sort of where, places like Magic School are coming in and saying, hey, we can do some of these things that you would normally have to spend hours on, and we can help you out with that. Cool. If we can do that and the teacher doesn't have to do those same things that are the grunt work, what can the teacher be doing now in the classroom as a result with all that extra time?
Yeah, but in general, right? So productivity gains have generally not gone to the workers historically.
Correct.
And
yeah.
And I would be skeptical that superintendents are going to be sitting around saying, oh, great, I've got 1,600 teachers and now 400 of them are free.
Those teachers supplement your time so you can spend
we're just
extra time
going to
on
spread that around
things.
So that we can all do more
that's a good
for
point.
kids. So I would be very worried about those kind of pathways and those kind of arguments of reducing teacher time being just converted to more teachers able to spend more quality time with kids. So I think we should.
You think it's more likely? You think it's more likely that the school goes, "Hey, this is something that'll replace 60% of teachers' time." Say, I don't know if that's the numbers they're talking about. Therefore, we can cut 60% of our teachers.
I'm saying that is a profound risk that we should all be highly opposed to, and aware that the incentives for the corporations and the incentives for the school districts will be aligned to that outcome.
Absolutely.
So we should be aware that AI has these kind of potential disruptions. But I also think that we have to be aware that, the arguments about curricular standards are drawn into this, which is what Whitney was referring to, that at some level, curricular standards are proxies for proficiency. They don't always name the proficiency that we care about. They name things that, well, if you can do this, you probably can do this other much harder and harder to measure thing that we really do care about. Collaboration isn't named. Critical sort of analysis maybe is named in some ways, but not sort of deeply embedded in the curriculum standards in many cases. But those are the things we might really want for the kids to be learning. And so if the lighter weight standards are the things that schools feel held account towards, and the AI is performing well against those lighter weight things, then we might end up getting rid of teachers and making the system much worse because there are no teachers to help do the deeper things that we know matter, that we drive through the town of shallow standards to get to, if that makes sense. And so I think it's important for us to be fighting this against this kind of optimization model, like entrepreneurial optimization in some ways, by saying, hey, we want deeper standards that are reflective of what a true human connection is between the adults and the kids and themselves. And we want to look for that in schools. And if we're challenging our schools to do that, then we would be expecting AI to do much more rather than just simply supplant this sort of shallow instruction that happens in a lot of low income and low performing disadvantaged schools today, right? I want to say so just to make this really concrete, instead of saying, oh, GPT wrote your essay and you fail, to say, GPT wrote your essay and your ideas are garbage. I want better ideas from you, right? Which is not a thing that happens in a lot of classrooms today, right? That expecting a higher level of performance. I want you working at the level of a prep school with regards to ideas, because we no longer have the differential of that kid's got all this profoundly precise grammar and vocab that you never got coming up to meet me, you're still a really smart person in the world. And we've been substituting precision in grammar and vocab for who's got the best ideas. Now, all of a sudden, maybe that playing field is leveled. But if we don't have the standards and the expectations of the school to say, I want great ideas from all kids, then we'll just be saying, oh, look, the kid now can perform at the level of grammar and vocab. Cool. We solved the problem. GPT just eliminated the gap, so to speak, which it didn't, right?
That connects, Steve, to your earlier point about the coding test or the developer test that we would give, and that there's been news too that the various AI models are able to take the various tests that the SAT, the ACT, et cetera, and perform well on those. And so now that it begs the question of, well, if AI can do that at a short period of time, what can't AI do across 30 days, as you were saying earlier, Steve? And what are those AI resistant standards or skills or learning or habits or whatever you want to label them as that we should be focusing on? We should be trying to get students to demonstrate those skills and performances in the classroom rather than the more shallow ones.
Yeah, no, I've been, as we're thinking about this, I'm just thinking, so you've got, Steve, you were talking about changing the standards, right? The way that we assess and possibly getting more at the root of what we're trying to assess than through the proxies that you mentioned. It seems like there's a lot of the pushback from the teachers that I've heard, at least, is that the students still need to learn those basic things, right? We can't have ChatGPT replace grammar knowledge. So I guess the question would be, how do we then cope with a world where even if ChatGPT isn't coming up with the best ideas, it does actually do a pretty decent job with grammar? Are we at risk? I mean, I think the answer is an obvious yes, but I think we are at risk of students potentially skipping over some of that base proficiency in order to get to the deeper thing if we let ChatGPT in the door. And on the other hand, we have to have them learn how to use the AI because this is going to be part of their world.
Right.
And so it seems like there's some sort of happy medium somewhere that we haven't figured out yet. But how, I guess if you're working directly with the teacher, what is your advice then to say, we know the student's going to use this? As Whitney said, we know that saying, no, you can't use this is going to lead to them just wanting to use it more. That's not going to happen. I mean, we saw what happened with New York City public schools, where they tried that for about 6 months and then realized,
it doesn't work.
Okay, that's not going to work. And not to mention the inequity that it creates to ban something that students who rely on school technology no longer can use, but kids who have wealth can. All sorts of problems with a ban, so that doesn't work. We know that allowing it without guidance doesn't work. What do we say to the teachers who are trying to make sense of this world that they're being forced into? Some of them want this in the classroom but aren't sure how to use it. Some of them don't want this in the classroom because of the fears about it. What's sort of the right course of action when you start to work AI into the classroom? How do you actually navigate that?
From the point of view of analogies to calculators, I think we have a conversation that we can look back on, which was identical, of like, how are kids going to learn math if all the computation is done for them? Right? Which is right. You still have to learn your times tables. If you just say, oh, you don't need to learn your times tables because the calculator's there, well, then you miss an opportunity, a particular kind of mathematical affordance to just learn structures that your brain can accommodate, even though I might not remember what 7 times 6 is instantly because I just use calculators and I don't have to remember that right off the top of my head. I can think back and recall it, but ELA, I think, is going to present similar things. So what I would boil this down to is speaking about what I think of in the classroom as academic integrity, as a relationship between kids and their work and kids and teachers and each other, and focus on that. So having exactly the explanation in the conversation you had of you're learning how to do this so that you can learn. I actually think that AI will be profoundly useful in helping kids learn grammar because they can see, they don't have to just struggle. They can see what a grammar structure might be that expresses their ideas, but they still need to apply themselves. I think this is the piece of Velcro I think we're trying to pull apart, which is the idea of kids productively struggling and applying themselves in a classroom, and the idea of AI helping them do that versus AI doing the productive struggle instead. And productive struggle is about integrity with a particular problem, not a particular skill set per se. And so I just think it's important for teachers who are working with kids to bring the foundational stuff of, you don't plagiarize because it's wrong. You don't use AI when you're not supposed to because it's wrong, not because of any other reason. It's a violation of integrity. And most kids are pretty high integrity, as it turns out. And the stronger the relationship with the teacher and the student, the higher the level of integrity. So that to me is the compass needle. It's not an answer, but it's a compass needle of the road out from here, of build relationships with the kids, rely on those relationships with the kids, explain the steps in between of what's happening and what's not happening for them when they use the AI and when they don't. And I think you can come up with that happy medium as this stuff evolves, which it's going to evolve very quickly. So Whitney, I think you probably have more concrete stuff.
I do. I have some concrete examples. And again, these are largely coming from either classroom teachers from the conference I went to or seeing teachers use them. So Steve, you already mentioned one, which is the idea of models. I think that's probably one of the biggest and most immediate uses of AI in its current form that I think is useful in the classroom. As a classroom teacher, I often, when we would go to write an essay, I would use models, and we would talk about what worked and didn't work in those, and I'd often use student essays. So now AI, and for example, my niece came to me and said, I have this paper and I don't know what to do, and I didn't get any help from the teacher. And I said, well, what's the prompt? And I had AI write a response. I said, don't copy this, but here you can see an example of what one looks like, so you can get a better sense of the type of the direction you should be headed. And again, I mean, I didn't follow up with her, so hopefully she didn't copy it. But the idea there is that it can be a model to help you understand or pave the way for that struggle that Steve is mentioning. So it can help rewrite prompts. So if you have my other niece in college, she had this really obtuse prompt that was very hard to understand. And so you could insert the prompt into AI and be like, what should I do with this? Like, what is this asking of me? So it can help translate those types of things that sometimes as teachers, we hope we're clear in what we're asking students to do, but maybe it's not so clear. I've seen another example from a science classroom where it was summarizing key points from some research, like scientific research, and then they were using that summary to then engage in question building about the types of things they wanted to go further explore to basically validate or further elaborate on that research. So it was a way into some more esoteric academia, but allowing kids to interact with that, or at least as an entry point. So doing summary of content can be helpful. I've seen, again, some models further elaborating or clarifying prompts or directions that are hard to understand. Doing some initial summaries or entry into more complex text than students might be able to interact with on their own. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm sure some will come up in just a second.
No, I think those are some really great examples. And Steve, I love that you brought in the notion of productive struggle in what you said earlier, because I think what you said is exactly it, that you want to facilitate the learning. You don't want to replace the thinking. And Whitney, that's what I'm hearing in your answer too, is that example of helping someone understand a prompt by having the AI rewrite it. I mean, another example I can think of with that is, okay, why wouldn't a teacher take the prompt and run it through an AI and say, is this going to be clear to, my 10th grade students who have been following the Common Core, assuming that they're, in the midpoint on the bell curve, are they going to understand this prompt, or is there other information I need to give, or is there any background that we need to make sure they learn first? Another example I've given when I've worked with teachers is use this as a prediction tool for your own teaching. So, when we think of building curriculum or building lesson plans, we think about teaching to the misconceptions and teaching to the misunderstandings. Okay, so if we're teaching fourth graders some of the facts about Newton's laws, what are their misconceptions going to be? What should I be thinking about? And so how do I, not to have the AI replace me as a teacher, but to say, here's some things that you might not have thought of. Okay, cool. I might not have thought of the fact that a student is going to have the misconception that a ball hitting a wall is not imparting anything to the wall itself. And so how do I then deal with that idea with the students when I wouldn't have thought of that before? So I love that, though, as using the AI, again, as that tool to check your understanding, to check the what does the student need to succeed at this thing, not to replace the student work, but to actually supplement the ability to do the work. That's, I think, a great way to look at that.
If computers aren't pre-programmed with expectations in them, they very rarely identify things that are missing. And AI, these general purpose AI, can identify something that's missing in like, hey, you thought of these three things, but what about this fourth one? So as a collaboration partner, as a sort of analyst, as a consultant, in these sorts of roles, which are generative and collaborative, AI can provide really useful tools. And just to finish this practical advice to teachers from my side, there are different kinds of AI models out there, and it's kind of confusing as to what each one is good at or whatever. But as a general matter, there are frontier models, what people talk about, the best models in the world that are publicly available. And they tend to cost money, but the surprisingly little money when you engage with them in the right ways. And they are so profoundly better than a lot of the free models that are out there that it's really worth understanding that if you're a teacher and you're digging in and sort of playing with some tech and you're like, this AI stuff's not that good, you may be stuck on a model, a free model, or a model that has been made available to you in some way that isn't the best in class. And right now, the best in class isn't at the NSA in some bunker in Colorado. The best in class, as far as we know, are from OpenAI and from Anthropic. And they really are a step change different from, I don't want Google to be mad at me, but step change different from a lot of the other open and lower cost models that are out in the world. So just from that piece of advice of, don't assume that you understand where AI can deliver value just by playing around with one model, because it's sort of like talking to your uncle at Christmas about your lesson planning is probably not a great plan, but talking to another expert teacher who's been working for 20 years will be a very different experience for that same conversation. And thinking of AI as having that range of capability and expertise, from the bullshit uncle who just makes stuff up to win arguments to very precise and coherent thought partners who bring a lot of expertise to the table, they're all out there. So,
and I want to add what I was saying earlier too. These are uses right now, and we don't actually know what all the uses will be as we move forward. But I think there's also, as we were saying earlier, I think there's also a lot of uses of AI in the classroom that are mostly invisible in some ways to the teacher and students. And you said, Sean, we should get into some of the technical pieces, but I think there's some ways that AI works in the background that give us some possibilities in the future for some really interesting affordances. So I think that's where we get into some of the free search, Steve, and some of those issues that AI is over. Yeah, free text search.
Yeah. I mean, look, the best interface is no interface. And I think that's one way to say it. I think what, Sean, you were getting at earlier about chat or your interview partner, chat bots are not ideal, like just texting back and forth. It kind of sucks. But it's way better than having to pick from a checkbox and then enter 5 fields. And, so it might be better than what came before it, but it's not as good as just not having to do anything to get a problem solved. And I think AI opens the door for a lot of problems that we had just to not be problems anymore, rather than them being more efficiently solved, or otherwise they just, the problem disappears. And I think, Whitney, that's what you're getting at in the future. Just for example, this is a huge human systems problem that is getting solved by AI very rapidly right now. we've been working with a large data bank of professional development resources, fairly high quality, nationally recognized, and working with a partner to have an AI essentially read all of those PD documents. So a teacher can come in and say, I'm working with in-kind planes, but I'm working with first graders. What are some resources that I might use to help me understand how to bring that across? And there might be no resources that address that specific problem, but the AI can go and read inclined plane for 11th graders and then go read about effective pedagogy for first graders and then come up with some synthetic stuff and say, hey, I think you might approach it this way. And what we also provide is, and here's all the receipts. Here's all the articles that I read to give you that piece of advice. So if you want to go deeper, you can read these various articles and do your own synthetic aggregation. That's just that's a problem that gets solved because a teacher doesn't have to go. Yeah, they don't have to go and read all the research, right? That's the UX so the old way was, here's a library of resources, go search through them, read them, draw your own conclusions. And it's like, you don't do any of that. That part of the problem is no longer a problem at all. It's just not a thing you spend time doing. You're now working much closer to the actual problem that you have. So I have a lot of fear that AI is going to do various kinds of replacement because of the incentives. But I also have a lot of optimism that AI is going to make a lot of problems that we had go away so that we can actually work on the problem that we want to work on. And that's an example of it.
Yeah. And another example that we're working on is this idea of access to resources that are directly related just to interest or student need, like misconceptions or needs, knowledge needs. And so as a classroom teacher, often I would start teaching a unit and I had to spend time motivating kids to get excited about the topic that I selected. And I'm not suggesting that that's going away. There's still a world where a teacher is going to pick a topic and teach about that topic. But now with AI, there's a possibility that basically almost on demand, if they're learning about, it's a first grade classroom and they're learning about frogs as a class, then kids could go get on some kind of app or something where they have access to resources about frogs. But as they're reading about frogs or listening to information about frogs or looking at pictures of frogs, it might mention a lily pad. And so then they click on lily pad and now they have a completely new set of content related to lily pad. And as they're reading about lily pad, it mentions chlorophyll. And they're like, I don't know what chlorophyll is. I'm a first grader. And so they click on chlorophyll and now I explain science behind chlorophyll. And the teacher doesn't have to go create all of those resources and predict, okay, I think my kids might be interested in X topic. And so now I have to find the resource for this. And so AI allows that more student-directed knowledge building and path finding for themselves. And the teacher is basically guiding that by saying, frogs is an interesting thing to learn about. And now here I'm like stimulating that interest. And now you can go learn about the things that really spark your curiosity or fill in the gaps that you might have if you have never engaged with a frog in real life. And then the kids are just basically benefiting from some of the power that AI is or the affordances that AI is providing in that way.
And just to be clear, it sounded like these are things that Learning Tapestry is working on. Those last two examples, at least. Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's really cool. How do you this may go too in depth, but just on the chance it doesn't, how do you, with that last example, Whitney, that you shared, how do you do quality assurance on that? How do you make sure that the AI is actually coming up with legit learning experiences and not just inventing facts about chlorophyll and frogs?
Yeah. It's a great question and one that we've been spending a lot of time trying to figure out. And so as we've started on this, we've been doing a lot of work from the beginning, making sure that humans are looking at and vetting all of the content so that it isn't producing that. Another thing is if you constrain the parameters or the boundaries at which you're looking at content, it automatically seems to reduce the amount of hallucinations, as people say, related to AI. So if you're asking about some really abstract thing that there's not a lot of information on, it is a higher likelihood that the AI is going to hallucinate. But if you're asking about frogs, there's a ton of information out there and available related to frogs. And so one of the ways we've been thinking about that is figuring out where does the AI perform really well just by its natural state, and how can, like, what are the problems in those spaces that we can solve for. So just by fact of saying, hey, early elementary or elementary as a whole, there's a higher likelihood that the content is going to be widely available and more widely accurate. So just narrowing in on that is one way we've tried to kind of safeguard against that. Including humans in the review process is another. And in a sense, we're watching that, and over time, as we learn, as the AI improves over time, we assume that we will have less and less human review, but we haven't necessarily realized that yet.
The model matters. So some models will make up stuff with a much higher propensity than other models. So not all models are created equal. These are AI models, like I mentioned, Claude Opus and GPT-4 Turbo have a much lower propensity to make things up than some of the open weight models and other sort of lower quality, lower cost models that are out there. So that's important, that what tools you use changes this. But I think what Whitney's saying is really important, that even within a given model, it's not like if the AI is known to hallucinate 1% of the time, that's not an even distribution over all questions. That just means there are certain kinds of questions where it still is not well trained enough to say, I don't know, and it starts making stuff up. But for things that are well understood by society, these frontier models for sure are generally producing almost no hallucinations at this point. So we are human reviewing because we're not crazy and we don't want AI to just be running off half-cocked. But I think we're also finding that we are not intervening very frequently to make corrections on issues of factualness. Sometimes we're throwing out wording or other things because we don't like the way it's saying something, but not because it's harmful for kids or incorrect or inaccurate. It's just like any editor might say, yeah, try again on that sentence. You can do better, like you would with a human author in that way. I also want to say that what we're attempting internally is not replacing human authors with robots. And I've seen some projects that are headed down that road, and I have some skepticism about that we are not seeing that the quality of the writing is superior to high quality human writing, but it's adequate. And this is, again, a point of like, what is the affordance that the AI provides? Extremely low cost, extremely high accuracy, and sort of relentless and tireless in its effort. And Wikipedia represents a relentless and tireless effort by a massive cadre of volunteers to go and characterize the sum total of human knowledge to the best that's publicly available. And that is a profoundly useful and valuable thing that resource has done, and all of those volunteers have done. But it really shouldn't exist by all the laws of sort of statistics. Like, it's amazing that we got that and they didn't commercialize it and turn it into something, ad driven or subscription driven or something. We got this one free thing out of the internet, which is great. But I don't think we're going to get another one of those where a group of volunteers sort of mass together in this way to solve particularly a much more esoteric problem like first graders and what their knowledge sets and what they need to know. And so it's not a problem that we can apply that volunteer model to. And it's not a problem that's sort of economically feasible to apply a paid content writing model to. So it's just like, it's a problem, again, that just isn't going to get solved if it doesn't get solved this way. And so that's one thing that we're trying to at least focus, trying to keep an ethical frame on what we're doing, of not just sort of, oh, it's cheaper to do it this way, let's get rid of all the humans involved. It's like, hey, here's a problem that just is never going to get solved because of the various constraints on the problem in the old world, the stone and mortar bridge world. This is a span that we can cross only with AI. And so it's just going to be unspanned until we use AI to solve this problem. Those are the really attractive and interesting problems from my perspective, and I think Whitney's too.
Great.
I love that ethical take on it too, that this is something, like you said, that it's maybe not impossible, but yeah, Wikipedia is definitely an anomaly, and that sort of level of human volunteerism, belief in this shared purpose you don't see a whole lot of that for free. And yeah, so I think that's a good way to look at this. We're not trying to replace the humans. We're trying to do things that wouldn't happen. Looking forward, so final question on this. Looking forward at EdTech, AI is constantly evolving. You alluded to this just now when you were talking about hallucinations and how much that's improved in just the span of a year. And I mean, we're recording this in April 2024. It's basically a year and a half, maybe slightly more than that, since most people even heard of ChatGPT, let alone all these other AI options out there. So the change is coming faster and faster and faster. And what do you see changing as AI evolves, specifically in the field of education and ed tech?
First off, public backlash against AI is inevitable. That is coming, and it will come into schools. And what I don't want is essentially an anti-vax sort of meme or mental virus growing up around AI and damning all the good with the bad. So I want us to be skeptical. I want us to be vigilant. I want us to prevent harm from leaking out from the AI innovation space into the educational space, because I think there's a lot of potential for that.
Mm-hmm.
But the answer can't be we need to ban AI from schools, because it's a nonsensical. It's sort of like banning water, or so, it's going to become, or electricity or Wi-Fi, right? That was a thing for a while, but I think we've overcome that one. So it is going to be a piece of technical infrastructure. It is going to be part of the knowledge fabric and the learning fabric, and there's going to be a backlash. And we want to have a gradient of responses that are commensurate with the pressures that are going to come, because parents need the school district to represent their interests. But we need it to be not like a hard wall or a flat ban of like, keep the parents out, they get no say, or, ban everything. We got to have a nuanced response that helps them understand how these tools are going to be used, how they're going to be monitored, and how they're going to be sort of responsibly engaged with their kids. So that's one thing that's coming. It's not really, maybe you're asking for like what positive things are coming, but that one's coming, and we're going to have to be all ready for it from a sort of policy and other perspective. Whitney, I don't know if you want to drop any in. I can mention some others.
And I think this just elaborates on the ideas you were just sharing, Steve, this idea of there's also a risk of a digital divide. And Sean, you brought this up a little bit earlier as well, that if we don't engage, I think it's the whole idea of good faith use versus bad faith use, Steve, that you've shared before. And I'll let you elaborate on more because it is your idea as well. But this idea that if we cut some kids off from accessing the AI, that it will essentially create another divide of the kids who have access will learn the skills and how to work with it and benefit from that. And then the kids who don't will continue to stay ignorant of it, not by choice. And that then there will be this divide as we move forward into the future where some will have and some will not. But I think it goes into this idea of good faith use and bad faith use. So I'll throw it back to you, Steve, to share more on that piece.
If the bar is set at this, all these tools need to defend themselves against bad faith actors who try to pervert and sort of corrupt their outputs, and we can ensure that no one is going to ever have a negative interaction because of that, there will be a divide, because that will not occur in rich families' homes on their Wi-Fi, right? Those tools will be assuming good faith access. And so we'll be leveling down the tools and the capabilities that we enable in schools, and that will be widening a divide between what kids who need to depend on schools to provision these kind of resources to them, and what families are going to provision these resources outside of school anyway. So I think we want to be very careful about that kind of do no harm as the default, right? You can't eliminate harm from digital systems. You can't eliminate harm from school buses crash and hurt people. Like, there's harm that's done, and there's risk that occurs in all aspects of society and all aspects of schooling. And we have to talk about measures of risk and acceptable risk and the use of systems to enable something that is worth that risk, whatever that risk may be. So characterizing and assessing risk, that's, I believe, the graduated or graded response to integrating AI into schools. And my point is that if you engage with kids in a heartfelt and sort of human way, there's a lot of good faith that comes from that. There are a lot of kids want to be there to learn, and they want to engage with the problems that they have in learning and thinking about the world and developing their ideas. And I think when teachers see that going on, that's the reason they stay in the business, is like those moments when they get that experience in a classroom. And AI can be engaged in that kind of work, but it can also be engaged in reductive and simplistic work like social, accountability and grade promotion assessment and all kinds of stuff that it shouldn't be involved in and could be really perverted to make a more harmful environment.
I think that's a really, really good point and something for people to keep in mind. It reminds me of things like firewalls in the school, and should we have a permissive firewall versus a really restrictive one? And where we came down was permissive, because we can watch what's happening and respond to the problems rather than just say, no, we're going to make sure no problems happen, because there are definitely going to be things that get limited by that would be really valid learning experiences, whether it's the content that someone couldn't get to via a restrictive firewall, or even the mistakes that they could make because of a permissive firewall. Both of those are really valid learning experiences. And if they don't learn those things in the school, well, they're going to go off and try to figure out a way around it somewhere else. So why would we not want to have that experience here? So no, I think you're spot on with that the sort of sensationalism, to create these bad faith things, the deep fake videos or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'll happen with the tool. But let's also, I think your point is, let's also focus on the good that can come from it, and the fact that most of the students are not trying to do that stuff, that bad stuff. I like to tell teachers that students usually, the reason that you'll see most students cheat is because they hate the assignments that they're being given, and they can't stand wasting their time. And so for an AI to come along and say, sure, I can write this article, this paper that really requires no thought and just regurgitation of what I've been learning in the classroom, yeah, students might want to cheat on that. So maybe we should start rethinking how we're giving out these assignments to actually promote more critical thinking and creativity, as opposed to just show me that you memorize this stuff.
Amen.
Yeah, I think that you're really getting at the core value system, which is, in the positive scenario, there are different paths here. And we've been talking about different paths, and positive and negative, and they're not exclusive to each other. But in the positive path, we can ask our kids to learn and do more because of the amplification of their effort and their learning that an AI can provide in lots of different aspects of their schooling. And so I would love to see public school kids in poorly resourced and disadvantaged environments getting expectations that look more like prep schools. I would love to see that become possible, because AI enables those kids to reach out. This is Paulo Freire's idea, right? Ask kids about the things that matter to them in their world. Like, why am I discriminated against? Why don't I have as much money as other people? Asking those kind of questions might not be able to develop their answers as effectively without an AI as with an AI. And so if we start asking those kind of questions and getting kids to pursue and refine and sharpen their ideas, as you were describing with a sort of collaborative environment, that creates a room for new expectations in schools. And I can't say that I'm optimistic, but I'm very encouraged by the possibility that we could take that road with this technology. And so I hope that, and we're certainly, Whitney and I are working on trying to, encourage and promote the industry to head down that road, and not some of the other roads that we've all talked about on this podcast.
Well, I love ending on that optimistic note. This has been just a really great conversation. I've loved hearing your thoughts on this, and also just the specifics of what you're doing at Learning Tapestry. It's really interesting work, and I also just love hearing how it's that sort of the sort of back end work that influences what can happen in the classroom just as much as the sort of flashier thing that you would see in the classroom itself. I think it's really cool for people to hear about the way that you're approaching this problem as AI as a facilitation of learning, as opposed to the learning tool itself necessarily. So that's been really great to hear about. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I really appreciate your time on this. Is there, just as a final question, if people want to learn more about what you're doing, what your company's doing, where would you want them to go to see this stuff? And is there anything else that you'd like to share before we close out?
I mean, we're a consulting and software engineering shop, so not entirely useful, like we're slow and boring, and so not entirely useful to the teachers in classrooms and schools. We don't have a thing to offer in that regard. I mean, I think we're always happy, and we have taken random over the transom inquiries from people who just want to talk with us. So I would solicit someone who's, motivated or interested to reach out to us. Our website is learningtapestry.com, and there's a contact button there. So we, anyone who's just curious or wants to reach out, we're welcome that kind of conversation. I think we're always happy to engage. And I will share with you a quote that is really meaningful to me from a guy named William Johnson Corey, who was a headmaster at Eton in the 19th century. And maybe you can share that in the show notes, which is a statement of learning that reflects that high expectation that I mentioned, in the closing remarks. And I think maybe other listeners would be interested to read that, of saying, hey, wait, can we change our expectations of kids to something more along what he was talking about for elite sort of English, prep school kids? Can we change our expectations for learning for everyone now because we have these amplification tools for achieving more? So I'll give that to you to put in the show notes, maybe.
It's a great call to action, absolutely. And yeah, we'll include the website for Learning Tapestry. So again, thank you both so much for joining. This was really fun and just a pleasure to be able to talk with you both. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
And so folks, that's all for now. Thanks for listening, and always keep learning. Did you learn something just now? Get the full episode of Ways We Learn wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, we'd love to get your rating or review.